I am new to this response videos game, and the couple of videos I made before that were on TikTok, where the bar is very low, and I was primarily responding to flat earthers and science deniers in my second language, which is Arabic. However, now I'm responding to someone like Sargon of Akkad on YouTube, which I find to be a greater feat, mainly because Sargon is a very smart and an intellectual person, and I value his opinion on a lot of things. And even in this video that he titled Trust the Experts, which is the video I'm going to respond to, and I feel obligated to respond to, you'll find that I disagree with some aspects of what he said, but I agree with the message. It's just the sentiment that it carries is the one that I disagree with, and I'll explain why. So now that I have wasted a minute of your time giving excuses, I'm going to do my very best to represent Sargon of Akkad's ideas in the best light they can be represented in and explain my disagreement with them and point out which aspect of his video that I agree with and which aspects that I disagree with, starting by the ones that I completely disagree with because of the sentiment they carry. Sargon in his video starts by calling the title of expert.
The lofty title of expert designates entry into the hallowed pantheon of modern intellectual life.
And then he adds, saying,
We trust our doctors, our scientists, our economists, our experts to provide us with objective, unbiased information about the world and what we ought to do in it.
In my humble opinion, I think that there's a huge difference between someone who is a doctor and someone who's a scientist and someone who is an expert. And I'll explain. What is a scientist? A scientist is someone who uses the scientific methodology. It's using empirical data, using objective information that we could measure and test and manipulate around us in reality to form a model and then provides a theory that explains how the model functions. And by theory, I don't mean guesswork. I mean theory in the scientific settings. I mean theory as in the best explanation we have after repeated testing and after prodding and after all the information that we have corroborates it and makes it into the robust form that we call in the scientific setting a theory. Like, for an example, in my field, a theory in physics is not just our guesswork. So, this is what I mean by scientists, and this is what most people who understand what a scientist is would say. Why do I find that different from an expert? Because an expert isn't obligated to operate under the same discipline. And it's called a discipline for a reason. I agree with Sargon of Akkad that there is no such thing as an unbiased opinion. However, there is an unbiased measurement. See, when Sargon of Akkad points out to a statistic in the world, say an increase of crime rate in a specific area done by a specific demographic, that's an objective thing that we could measure. It's based on real objective data in the world. The scientists would look at it and say, well, this is a data point. We need to add it into our model in order for it to factor in our way to view the world. Meanwhile, an expert would give his opinion on the matter without doing any testing, without corroborating his data, and he's not obligated to do so. You'll find that in the scientific community, at least, when someone makes a claim, his claim is worth nothing unless he can demonstrate it into a peer-reviewed paper where his peers would poke and test and repeat and check and follow the method that he followed to derive his information, and they would point out every mistake he made, every shortcoming he did, and his paper would most of the time be rejected. Like, this is why it's very, very difficult for someone within the scientific community to come with new information, to come up with new discoveries, because the process is very, very difficult and the bar is very high. Meanwhile, an expert could just walk into a TV station after being invited or nominated by a lawmaker or a politician to give us his opinion on something. And who's going to look behind him? Who's going to tell him that he's not allowed to say his opinion on such things? He's under no obligation to give you his sources. You don't even know what his sources are most of the time. Is it his opinion? Is it based on an information that he received? Is it even an informed opinion at all? You don't know. So the title expert, to me at least, seemed very arbitrary. And I don't know where you would get training or who you have to work with or where you have to do any sort of discipline in order to get the title expert. So I agree with Sargon of Akkad here on calling the title hollowed, but what I disagree on is him using the title expert as an umbrella term for people like doctors and scientists. And I just explained why.
They apparently have privileged access to the arcane inner workings of reality that we plebeians do not.
It's not that these experts have a privilege into understanding the world around them. It's not like that at all. It's just that most people are ill equipped to understand academic papers. And by academic papers, I don't mean papers that are full of nonsense, jargon. I mean papers that actually explain complex theories and scientific data that has, say, for an example, long equations that are 6 pages long. Let me put it in a practical example. Say I want to explain to someone why doing something like this wouldn't work in physics, and it's based on our understanding of what we call the standard model of physics. I have to start by explaining to them the standard model of elementary particles. I have to explain to them what quarks are. I have to explain to them what is an up and down, what is a top or bottom, what is a charm and strong, why is the Higgs boson is the latest particle that we managed to discover, why was it hypothesized before that. All of this energy is wasted just so he can understand a paper that would change his life in no way, but it would expand his horizon in understanding the natural world. And we derived that information following the scientific method. I mean, for crying out loud, we had to build a huge hadron collider just so we could demonstrate that our standard model is correct, because it was a hypothesis before it was demonstrated to be the theory that it is. It only solidifies our understanding of the methodology and how strong it is into deriving real information about the world, because we can make a prediction and we can go out into the world and find evidence that demonstrate that it is exactly the way we hypothesized it to be. That's why the scientific method is strong, and that's why it's a discipline. You don't make a prediction and then find evidence exactly the way you expect to find them in the world after building a huge machine that would give you the results that you do. And then you can take those results and use them into practical applications. Say, for an example, building the computers and the technology we use today that allowed us to make these videos and communicate. If our understanding of physics isn't in the way that it is, these machines won't work, regardless of our biased opinions about them being correct or not. Objective reality will get in the way and will tell you, "Nuh-uh, you made a mistake here. This machine isn't going to function the way you expect it to because you modeled it based on faulty information. So the outcome is going to be faulty." Where is an expert in this process? You'll notice that these computers are mostly constructed by engineers that make using this information practical. And this information and this knowledge and all of these science is derived by the scientific methodology, by people who followed the discipline, who had to come up to 1,000 wrong conclusion and then test 1,000,000 times more when they found the right one, just to be sure, just to be accurate, because there's a lot at stake here. I've already 9 minutes in, and we're just starting the first 2 minutes of Sargon's video. And this is the problem when responding to such ideas or such concepts. It's that it requires a lot of information to bridge the gap between what most people think the scientific method is and what it actually is. And this is why a lot of people have this mistrust in experts, including myself, because these experts, 99% of the time, are not scientists. They're not people who had to do the scientific method, who had to follow this rigor, who had to do processes that are very, very disciplined, who had to taste the flavor of hard work, who had to be rejected over and over and over just so they can put a tiny pebble on the mountain of information that we build on every day. This is why I felt obligated to respond to this video. And yes, every human has their own perspective, their own biases, their own background, their own preconceived notions. In the scientific method, we follow a procedure that tries to minimize that as much as possible. And even then, we leave room for being wrong. That's why the most accurate machine you could make to measure, say, a distance between two walls in a room using a laser and an interferometer and 1,000 gyroscopes so you can factor in the rotation of Earth while you make these measurements, would still have, at the end of the paper of the specifications of this machine, something called the margin of error. Because we understand that nothing we make is going to be perfect. Because we are flawed beings still. We're not going to be 100% accurate. And even our most robust understanding is labeled a theory. Just so, one day, when someone discovers something new that could change our perspective on things, we will be open to changing our mind, because it's the rational thing to do. You have to be able to change your mind when new information comes in that contradicts your preconceived notions. It's not a flaw in the design, it's by design. Say, for an example, that you thought Earth was flat your entire life, and you've operated your entire life building buildings, making houses, short bridges with the understanding of the Earth being flat. And then one day you wanted to expand the bridge, and you wanted to build a much longer bridge, like, say, for an example, the one in the Golden Gate. And then you'll have to factor in new things. You'll notice that the pillars are closer on the bottom than they are on top. Why? That shouldn't happen in a flat Earth. You have to be open to new ideas and say, well, maybe the shape of the Earth isn't what I think it is. And I'm using the flat Earth example here just because I have been talking to flat earthers for a couple of days, so it's still, I'm still trying to do a cleansing of my mind of all the nonsense they say. But it's a very good example. You have to be open to new ideas in the rare case that you're wrong. And you have to factor in this new information if you want to build a bridge that is safe for people to cross. You can't just say, but no, we know that the Earth is flat. We can't change our mind now just because scientists discovered new information or engineers find out new measurements. And the experts, most of the time, will tell you, from our experience, which is where the word expert came from, we've been building bridges for 20 years or 30 years or how many years he've been an expert, and all of these bridges were built on the fact that the Earth is flat. They'll completely ignore all the scientists. They'll tell them, no, it's not. So this is why I agree with him on not trusting experts, but I completely disagree with him on labeling everyone who did a discipline or who studies an academic field as an expert, because scientists are not experts. Scientists are flawed beings just as everybody else, but they follow a very robust methodology that is self-correcting, that gave us fruits that we benefit from every day. And the thing is that he said a phrase that kind of annoyed me. He said,
"It just means that you know a lot about a narrow range of reality. And reality is a very complex thing. The interplay between different aspects of life is so irreducibly complex that making a change in one area can cause unexpected results in another."
And you know what? Sure. The physicist knows a lot about physics. The biologist knows a lot about biology. The chemist knows a lot about chemistry. But then he added that, in reality, all of these things are connected. They are connected in science as well. That's why I don't trust the experts who only delve into one field. In science, you might be an quote-unquote expert in one field, but then to get there, you have to study all the fields that are binding all of these things together. What do you think the bind between chemistry and biology is? A field called biochemistry. You have to study in order to become a doctor. You have to understand if you want to make anything in the pharmaceutical industry. It explains how cells function. It explains your entire metabolism. What do you think your metabolism is? It's an exchange in thermodynamics. You have to study physics in order to do it. You have to study thermodynamics and physics in order to understand how your metabolism works, which functions via biochemistry in a field of biology. Reality is interconnected, and scientists know this. It's just that we are human beings with the lifespan of almost 100 years. You can't spend your entire life just studying everything on the periphery. You have to go deep in order to contribute. And what happens is that when multiple people go deep in different directions, we find more information or bring it to the surface where people can connect it together. And that's what a model is. That's why models have predictive capability. That's why they functions in the way they do. We go back to the scientific method. That's why the scientific method is very strong. That's why it gives us all the fruits that we benefit from today. And this is my disagreement with Sargon here, is that these things are not done by experts. These things are done by people who study the scientific method and who functions in a completely different way, who have to work really, really hard to get there. And they are always scrutinized. Like there's a sentiment in science is that everything is scrutinized, including the methodology itself, which is why the scientific method is open for development every day. That's why when we do tests, we do double blinds so that our biases does not win. That's why we have to have a third party oversee the tests. That's why the experiments have to be tested in different apparatuses, in different places of the world. Sometimes even the hour of the day factors in. When you write a scientific log of your experiment, you write the temperature, the day, the time, how many people were there, if someone sneezed near the apparatus. All of it factors in, just so we could remove every bias we can. And you'll notice that all of these robust and empirical methods of measuring things starts to fade away the more you turn towards fields that are softer than that, like, say, for an example, sociology. Here lies the problem. Most of these experts are experts in fields like these, or here to give their opinion because some politician or lawmaker deemed them to be the best people to give their opinion on X matter. Sometimes it's not even their expertise. Sometimes it's not even field related to what they got training on or what they studied or the best of their skills. Sometimes you need several people from different fields to sit together and corroborate information together. I mean, take someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson. He works as a great science communicator. His expertise is in physics, but his job is to connect the bridge between the public and the scientific enterprise. And his real job is to connect people from different fields within physics and able to contribute together. I find the sentiment that we should not trust the people that he deemed as experts under the umbrella terms, such as scientists and doctors, to be very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. This title, expert, is very arbitrary.
As such, we see them fall into a pattern of confusion, where they are following the science, from contradictory conclusion to contradictory conclusion, flipping their opinions on things thought to be settled on a moment-by-moment basis. The experts therefore become people who cannot be relied upon, do not have a comprehensive view of the problem, and have no deep wisdom to impart. All they can do is take the latest surface-level data and conclude that, going forward, this is all the data that there is or will ever be.
The sentiment to trust the science is very stupid, and you will find that all the scientists will tell you the same thing. Because there is no such thing as the science. That's a social media thing. That's a legacy media thing as well. It's a TV thing. It's a pop culture thing. It's not a science thing. It's not an expertise thing. What we would say is trust in the scientific methodology when there's evidence beyond reasonable doubt. There's no such thing as trust the science. And notice here that even that trust is conditional when there is enough evidence that is beyond reasonable doubt. That's why we don't use the word proof in the scientific settings the same way we use the word proof in court. In scientific settings, proof only exists in math. Everything else is called evidence. And evidence is weight on a different standard. We call it the standard of evidence in science, and it varies. But proof only exists in math. You have to take your evidence and give a mathematical proof to it in order for it to be added to the theory. Say, for an example, you say, oh, I have this biochemical reaction that could present us with a new molecule that could solve all of our problems. You say, well, okay, can you write the formula for me? Why? Well, the formula would explain atoms in their binding connections, where all of these electrons went, where is the energy dissipated, what form of shape that this molecule would take, and that would demonstrate what form of... You have to do that in a scientific formula, in a mathematical formula. You have to do that in a chemical drawing that looks like complex hexagons, all connected together, with the symbols of every atom and its connections to everything else. And then you have to go into a lab and demonstrate the same thing. And then you have to show it under an electronic microscope so you can actually show the molecule that you're talking about. Because maybe you could write it on a paper, but then you have to demonstrate that, yes, you could actually do enough interactions between these atoms to bind in this way. An expert could talk you for days, for years even, and it's not going to have the same demonstrable power as a mathematical formula and then a picture from an electronic microscope. Things that were built using the scientific method, by the way. So you see, there's no such thing as trust the science. We just trust it the same way we trust our car to start every time we put the ignition in. There are times when you put the ignition key into the car and it doesn't start, but it's not because the science that was discovered that made the car function the first time changed overnight. No, it's because there's an aspect to the car or the environment around it that changed that you didn't factor into starting the car. Maybe you forgot your car keys last night and the battery ran out. Something that the scientific model of the car functioning, based on the theory of how the battery was made, would indicate that, the car shouldn't start today because the battery ran out. So you'll notice that the scientific method functions like this. Correct information in, correct result out. Bad information in, bad result out. Where does this bad result information comes in? It comes from people. People are flawed, not the methodology itself. Even though we are open to the methodology being wrong, and we are welcoming to someone that could demonstrate where this methodology is wrong and how it can be corrected. You see the difference? This is not how experts speak. This is not something an expert could demonstrate. And this is my disagreement with Sargon of Akkad. Even though we both agree on the fact that we should not trust these quote-unquote experts, and the statement that trust the science is stupid. Sargon says we see them floundering around, following the science, as he calls it, from contradictory conclusion to contradictory conclusion. That's the problem here. He points into a title of a headline, a news article. This is not science. This is not how we do things. There is no new information that is going to come that is going to correct the way we view things. Even though we're open to it, it still hasn't happened. You'll see pop culture magazines and news articles say scientists discovered that X thing is wrong, which could change their entire understanding of physics. Or scientists discovered this new bacteria that changes our understanding of everything we know about bacteria today. All of this is flamboyant headlines. It doesn't represent what the scientists discovered. It doesn't represent the actual findings. It doesn't represent anything. When you read an article, or not read, I should say, when you see an article on a magazine that says the scientists in X lab discovered that the distance between the Earth and the Sun is completely from what we've known for like 1,000 years. It's like, no, it's just, they just gave a more accurate result, which is the difference between the new result and the old results, like 0.00%. It's just because now we have a more accurate measuring tool. So the scientists updated their understanding. The title isn't wrong. Yeah, it's a different measurement from the one we had for 1,000 years. But by how much? Less than 1%? I wouldn't call that revolutionary. It's just better accurate so we can represent reality more accurately. Because that 1% could affect things on Earth. Say, for an example, radiation from the sun. Now we can measure radiation from the sun on Earth better. We could do spectroscopy better because it's based on our understanding of light. That sort of thing. This is why I don't trust experts when they give their opinions to these magazines. I trust science and scientific papers and peer-reviewed papers a lot more because it's accurate, uses real language, uses actual measurable data, uses real numbers that you could factor in and check and you could repeat in the lab anywhere in the world. Again, a disagreement I have with Sargon of Akkad, even though we both agree that these titles on these magazines and these headlines are stupid. But this is not what scientists do.
If everything that has been done to us was so above board, why did Biden feel the need to pardon Fauci, dubbed America's doctor, on his way out of the White House? It beggars belief to suggest that these people are good and decent, operating nobly with only our best interests in mind, when they instead act like a criminal cartel that has to give itself legal immunity as they flee with their ill-gotten gains. Peter Daszak, one of the men instrumental in the events of the COVID era, was published brazenly in The Guardian, informing us that COVID-19 was not created in a lab, and therefore any suggestion that it leaked from a lab was just a conspiracy theory.
Now, I don't live in the United States, and we've been very busy during the pandemic thing. I don't know what the deal is with Fauci. I have no idea what that's like. This is why I don't follow news when on these things. This is why I don't care what these news networks and publishers say about these topics, because most of it is stupid. My experience with it is stupid. So I don't know what the deal is with Fauci. A title such as the Doctor of America means absolutely nothing. It's an honorary title at best, and it's a nonsense, pompous title at worst. It's nonsense. It's not any recognized title. It's not anything robust. It's not real. It's just an arbitrary title, exactly like the title expert. So this is the difference between me and someone who has no understanding of this process. And I know it could sound elitist. I completely understand. And I can completely understand that reading a scientific paper full of jargon that most people don't know what it means is annoying and tiring. But the difference from here to there is a couple of hours reading. I can't sugarcoat it. If people choose to be lazy, then it's on them that they are put in this situation where they have to trust other people to translate this information for them. I would happily take anyone willing and teach them some lab protocol, and we could do some experiments together. And they could then verify for themselves that this information we have is accurate. But since most people are busy and can't do that, and are not willing to do that sometimes, even though they have all the leisure time to do so, well, I'm sorry, this is how reality operates. You have to trust other people who actually do the work. I don't know if this Dr. Fauci is one of them or not. This is why I don't care about the name of the person who published the paper. I only care about the content of the paper and the peer review underneath it, just in case I missed something out. That's it. That's what anyone in the scientific community cares about. They don't care for... Einstein could rise from his grave tomorrow and change his theory of relativity, and we wouldn't care, unless he publishes a paper and mathematical equation that demonstrates that, his new understanding of relativity is better and has better explanatory power than the one before that. And it needs to explain why as well. Doesn't matter if he rose from the grave and wrote a new one. That's why today we recognize Sir Isaac Newton for his contributions to the laws of physics more than we do his alchemy, for an example. Because one is demonstrable and the other isn't. We don't care if it's Isaac Newton. He was one of the greatest people of his time, and his understanding of physics is still with us until today. People think that relativity changed how we view the world and that demonstrated that Isaac Newton was wrong. Absolutely not. It further explained how, because Einstein presented the theory of how Newton's mechanics of physics function. Like, when he said mass attracts mass, he's correct. Einstein explained how mass attracts mass because of mass bending the space-time continuum around it, thus creating a gravitational well. It doesn't mean that Isaac Newton was correct about his alchemy, you see the difference. Yeah, he was an expert in a lot of fields back in the day, and he was the head of, I don't know, what was it? Something that has to do with the Royal Science Academy back then. But people didn't care about his alchemy. People cared about his physics for a reason, because they followed the scientific methodology. This is the difference I have with Sargon of Akkad here. And this is the difference I have with a lot of people. A lot of people would say, but it's Isaac Newton, for crying out loud. And I would say, I don't care. He needs to demonstrate it, or I'm not going to care. That's it. That's the only difference we have. He further goes on in his video, and I mean Sargon, showing us videos where he puts statistics of things like crime rates and migration. You know what's the difference between a scientist and an expert in this situation? A scientist would agree with Sargon here. Crime rates are objective thing we could measure in a society. Every criminal action based on the laws of that country would be documented and recorded and factored into whatever conclusion we make. The difference here is that these quote-unquote experts, some of them, even scientists sometimes, who abandon the scientific method and move into this new form of expertise by being activists, are the results we see today. They're not scientists. They're not experts either. They're activists. This is the problem. I hate the title expert. I hate the title activist even more. Science, even in science, I have to point this out. There is this hijacking of the term science and scientists in our society, and even within the scientific community. Scientists today are being influenced by this collective narrative that a scientific study is too harsh, it's too cruel, it removes the human aspect of it. We need to humanize science. We need to make it more of a collective effort, more than it is, as if it isn't. We need to make it so that every opinion counts. Science needs to be more inclusive, as they call it. And everybody just comes in and weighs in. And we have to make it a democracy, the conclusion that we reach as a scientific community. And a huge majority of scientists know that this is nonsense. But that's the science, quote unquote science, that the media likes. That's the quote unquote science and scientists and expertise and activists, as I call them, that the media puts forward for everyone else. They have real credentials, they did the work, they studied, they graduated, but they don't follow the scientific method the way it is designed to work. And sadly, no one cares when a boring scientist explain long equations and the rigorous process. It's nonsense to these people. What the hell is this nerd talking about? No one cares. They want that flashy, dreamy language these media figures keep presenting. And of course, they're going to pick popular, charismatic characters for that. They're not going to pick someone in a lab coat who's working 8 hours on an experiment that failed 900 times. That's not nice. That's not flashy. That's not flamboyant. That's not fun for anyone to watch. And sadly, this is the truth of what we see today. This is why I find all of news and all of media to be nonsense, especially on scientific topics. So I can completely understand how things appear from the perspective of someone like Sargon of Akkad, and I agree with him on a lot of things, but the sentiment of how he said and what he says is dangerous. Exactly for the same reasons. He gave a very good example when he used the COVID lockdowns. I completely agree. The entire thing was politicized to hell. There was this old movie I watched not long ago about a meteor coming to Earth, about to hit it. People kept turning that meteor into such a political issue. Even though it's an impending doom on our planet, people politicized it to hell and used it to villainize the other half for endless days. Everybody turned into busybodies, just vilifying the other side and blaming them for everything that happened and why don't they find a solution and yada yada yada. Instead of actually working on stopping that meteor. or at least saving the human species outside of our stupid wet rock that we call Earth. This is what happened when the pandemic started. This is exactly why I have absolutely no trust in most people. This is exactly why I have no trust in common laymen and politicians for that matter. Because one is easily swayed, and the others are experts on swaying people. And they all do it for their own interests, because of their own biases, and none of them is trained or disciplined into looking at things objectively. And it's a flaw in our culture. That's the problem I have with all of this. I absolutely agree. It's a disaster what happened during the pandemic. And it could have been handled a million way better. However, it's because of reasons I listed, not because the science behind it was bad. And yes, a lot of the nonsense that were presented to the media is nonsense. We didn't arrive into making a vaccine by talking on TV shows. It happened in labs where people tested RNA for days, weeks, hours, months, understanding protein binds, understanding the coating, how the virus mechanism interacts with our cells. All of that. All of these are real things. RNA is real. Viruses are real. Microscopes are real. Protein binds are real. The lipid coatings of the viruses is real. People just were scared. They didn't know how this virus would spread. Some thought it was airborne. There were a lot of hypotheses at the start. People were panicking. They were making a lot of stupid choices. Politicians were just jumping on every opportunity to be the saviors. Every one of them wanted to be the pioneer that knew exactly what he should do. And the confidence by which they spoke is so intoxicating, I'm sure. But no one in a real lab knew exactly what was happening. They were still understanding this new virus. They were still studying it. They were still testing it. They were still observing how it behaved in its natural environment, its incubation period, how it functioned, what it did, what's the long-term effect of it, how it mutates. You ask a doctor, they'll give you a much more informed opinion. You ask a biochemist, they'll give you even more informed opinion. You're asking these politicians and lawmakers who get their opinions from quote-unquote experts, and you think they'll give you a real opinion? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yes, and the costs of these choices that they make is huge at times. Sometimes they lead to irreversible damage to our society, to our culture, to our economy, to the health of some people, which then affects all of these, to the perspective of how we view similar issues in the future, which I would gamble is even more damaging to everything. It's what led someone who is highly intellectual, highly intelligent, like Sargon, to say these things. And I don't blame him. I have, for a fact, blamed the scientific enterprise for not having better representatives, for not coming out in public and saying, you're all idiots and ignorant, you should not be talking about something you know nothing about, stop this nonsense about trusting the science, we still don't know how this virus operates. But I'll tell you why that didn't happen. Because people fear what they don't know. And most people fear the statement, I don't know. That's a societal issue. That's a human fear of the unknown. And it's what leads everyone to give their opinion like this. None of them is ready to stand and say, I don't know, but I'll work really hard to figure it out, because it doesn't entail trust. And in politics, trust is everything. And all of these people are highly motivated by politics and highly politicize everything. So they can't be honest and say, I don't know, it's a new thing, we need to study it to give you any information about it. And even the information we find, we're still unsure about it, because that would make people distrust you. But that's exactly what we do in science. We don't speak on anything unless we know. That's why we call it a hypothesis when we don't know, but we have a good guess, and then we call it theory when we do know and have a good guess and leave room for being wrong in the future, just in case we discover something new. Like, that's how disciplined scientists are.
The all-too-human corruption of Fauci, Daszak, and the Biden administration reveals its face, that it was taking advantage of our goodwill and faulty assumptions about experts, that they were doing their best for us. It is in almost every conceivable subject that our experts are deceiving not only us, but themselves. They have a particular ideological perspective, and with it comes an agenda, and so they mine data to create justifications for advancing that agenda in the face of the ruin that these policies are inflicting upon us.
And I completely agree with this sentiment, that these quote-unquote experts and politicians and lawmakers, and he gave an example of the Biden administration, took advantage of the goodwill of people, and I would add, and their ignorance.
You may of course remember the censorious regime of the fact-checkers, who were determined to only allow their official approved narrative of all events on social media, a narrative that eventually proved to be wrong. Indeed, even the practical benefits of fact-checking was shown to be easily replaced by community notes. As a recent post from the London School of Economics and Political Science tells us, community note fact-checks can be high quality. Community notes, like other fact-checks, work. Community notes is a fundamentally legitimate approach to moderation. Believe it or not, I didn't need an expert to tell me this.
Extremely dangerous to our democracy.
But does this restore the accounts of those tyrannized during the era of the fact-checkers? Does this restore to good graces the people who were oppressed by the expert consensus?
Now, I have a strange opinion here when it comes to the fact-checkers versus the community notice. I, as a person, trust the community notes on social things, on events that happened in the world, on testimonies in regards to events that happened, things that people said, etc. I don't trust neither the fact-checkers nor the community notice when it comes to facts about topics like viruses, science, physics, discoveries, that sort of thing. Because both of them functionally are the same thing. It's people giving their opinion based on what they know. I return back to the scientific method when it comes to these things, because while it's people that find these discoveries and provide this information, it is the methodology that vets the information itself. It's the methodology that vets whether this information is robust and valid and has the high standards of evidence that we require, or is it just someone's opinion and they can't provide anything with it? Is it just someone says, yeah, this thing happened at X year at that area? Or does it come with archaeological findings and radiometric dating of rocks and samples from that area, which demonstrate their claim with high formulas that explain the atomic decay of the atoms and what the chemical compositions of the samples is? Do you see the difference? It's very, very... They might appear the same on the surface, but they're far different than they are alike.
During the first tenure of Tony Blair in New Labour, an influential research paper by the Home Office entitled Migration, an Economic and Social Analysis provided the intellectual foundation for New Labour's mass immigration policy, and in it they argued broadly that though there may be challenges which come with mass immigration, economic theory dictated that it would grow the economy and produce a boom of prosperity. Here are some quotes from it. Migration is welfare improving, not only for migrants, but on average for natives. Migrants are self-selected. Partly as a result, migration is most likely to occur precisely when it is most likely to be welfare enhancing. Migrants will pay taxes, both direct if they are in work and indirect. Given the usual age structure of migrants, this would imply that migration would be likely to raise per capita income. They did accept that there would be some negative outcomes, but concluded that these would be outweighed by the benefits. Well, how has this played out? We have had unprecedented levels of immigration, which began with Tony Blair's opening of the gates to 250,000 net new people a year, which culminated in the Boris wave, which was nearly 1 million net new people per year. Where's the growth? Why do these graphs not correlate? Instead, the Institute of Fiscal Studies has told us that we are going to have to pay £100 billion extra in tax just to be able to afford the immigration that has been inflicted upon us. And this is only the financial cost. What is the cultural cost of giving our country away to people who don't care about it?
He provides this point when he speaks about migration. Remember earlier when I said that the experts would tell you that they've been building bridges for years and they've built all of these bridges based on the fact that the earth is flat, so they have no reason to change it now, despite what the scientists are saying, because the experts, quote unquote, know what they're talking about. This is exactly it happening in reality. The experts use their ideas and preconceived notions of migration in the most perfect scenario, without factoring the cultural background of these migrants. Are they going to be integrated into the new society or not? Something a scientist would factor in. Because you can't just pluck a person out of nowhere. They're not blank slates, as he calls it, and he's correct. These people would then have to interact with everything around them. And if the way they interact with their environment and culture doesn't allow them to integrate into that culture, then something else is going to happen. And in this case, it's crime. And he is 100% correct. He is 1000% correct. Because reality demonstrates otherwise. And reality demonstrates what is going to happen despite what the experts think. This is what scientists would do. They would measure things in reality itself. You could even take a sample in science. Consider it an experiment, a real social experiment, shall we say, and take a sample of these people, introduce them to the culture here, see how well they, I don't like the term assimilate, but let's just say integrate into their new society. Are they going to turn into productive members of this society, embracing its ideals and culture? Can they actually contribute something new to this culture that this culture would benefit from? Say, give criticism to something that would improve the quality of life of these people? Yes? Good. Integrate more of these people. How much more is another question that a scientist would ask. Because a little amount every year can be good. Lot every year can be bad. Because the amount is another factor into this equation. Think of it like chemistry. You could present a small sample of a self-replicating molecule, and then it would change the entire lake into the yield of the biochemical reaction you want. If you present a lot, it would stunt the process because there wouldn't be enough energy for the process to continue. Same thing here. You could take small samples of people, and the effects of the local culture would work in their favor, while they flavor, shall we say, the existing culture, slowly even improving it as they integrate slowly into it. Or you can take 1 million of them, dump them, and then you will see the clash happening. Scientists who actually do science would factor in every little detail. And when they make a mistake, they say, oh, we didn't think of this, we didn't expect it, but now that we did, let's change our conclusion. What would experts motivated by political motivations would do? Deny it, or double down, or do all this nonsense that we see today. Because Sargon here is absolutely correct. But you'll notice that I once again make the distinction between the experts that he is complaining about and the scientists that would agree with them. Because these experts or former scientists or whatever they are still flawed people. And their activism has more importance to them than it does representing objective reality, which is what they should be doing as scientists. It's what they trained to do. It's what they studied to do. It's what we value within the scientific community. The thing is that media uses this information and formulates it in a way, packages it in a way that influences public opinion. Scientists are not easily influenced by such narration of details or data or events. We look at it objectively. Now, in the case of Sargon of Akkad, he actually looks at the statistics objectively and reaches the conclusion that is best represented in reality. I agree with him when he uses this statistic. I love this thing, by the way, is that people understand how powerful science is, so it's in every aspect of our world, and yet they refuse to use it in every aspect of reality when they come to conclusions or when they make decisions. So when their stupid decision backfires, they blame science. It's the dumbest thing ever.
Every aspect of the managerial technocracy is driven by the rule of these liberal experts, and time after time, what we have seen is that it turns into a power grab by repulsive losers in the arena of social interaction, by which to amplify their professed area of experience into a weapon which is used to cudgel the normal society that otherwise failed to recognize their monodimensional brilliance. The experts, as we have seen time and time again, are just human like the rest of us, and the hallowed grace of expert opinion can and will be used by vulgar and grasping people to advance an ideological agenda to our collective detriment.
Notice that he ends his video by specifically mentioning liberal experts. The fact that he added the word liberal to it tells you everything you need to know. And he is correct. These experts are politically motivated. So you can't trust their quote-unquote expertise on anything, because there is no such thing as a liberal scientist or a left-leaning scientist or a right-leaning scientist. There's no such thing. There's just science. There's just a scientific methodology and people who follow it who are designated the title scientists. That's it. And if anyone refuses to stick to the methodology, they could label themselves whatever they want. But objectively speaking, you can tell when they diverted from the scientific method. And how do you know? Because what they say isn't going to correlate to objective reality that we experience every day. That's the ruler that turns us back. This is how we know when a discovery is not a discovery. This is how we know an experiment failed. We don't just make believe. The result comes out in reality and says, no, this is not gonna work. This is counterproductive to the goal you set. You want this metal to be hot by keeping it still? It's not going to. You need to insert energy into it in order to heat it. By what? It doesn't matter. It's gonna have to shake the atoms in it in order to heat it up. Unless you do that, this bar of X amount of metal isn't going to be hot. You can talk to it all day and you can tell it all the nonsense political bias you want. At the end of the day, when you measure it in Kelvin, it's not going to change temperature unless something else in reality around it or to it is going to change. So when someone tells me a left-leaning or a right-leaning expert said X, I tell them I don't care. And it's not that I don't care because I don't trust the scientists and doctors that he mentioned earlier under the umbrella term experts. I don't care because there is no politics in science. The scientific methodology isn't politically motivated. It never was. People are flawed. The method isn't. And I'm still open to people presenting me with a better methodology. That's my disagreement with Sargon of Akkad and his video. And I'm sorry I took almost an hour to explain my point of view. And I hope that someone would find it useful. I leave the comment section open. You could roast me all you want. You could even correct my English at the process. I might even brush up on my old English a little bit. But who knows? It's an hour-long video. I truly hope that he sees it. I truly value his opinion. And yeah, that's my response to his video. I hope to make more in the future. who knows? I might make it a thing. I'm trying to work on making my media presence more visible outside of TikTok. And that's it. I hope to see everybody soon, and I hope this video finds you well. Ta ta.